charts, paradise, triangle, money. You may associate a different set of words with Bermuda, but I guarantee that when you think of Bermuda, you don't think about wrongful convictions. But today, I want to tell you a story about a wrongful conviction that happened in Bermuda. And without exaggeration, it's one of the most important, most revealing, most eye-opening cases of wrongful convictions in the Caribbean today. In a nutshell, a young man was convicted of a horrible crime based on what seemed to be the surest possible evidence. To many looking on, the case against him seemed airtight. He was convicted, he was sent away for life, and it seemed like he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Until suddenly, almost overnight, everything changed, and the whole case against him collapsed. And it was like the government couldn't get him out of the prison fast enough. But there's more to the story. Because of what they discovered in his case, prosecution in Bermuda had to review more than 400 cases. And up to this summer, a full year later, Bermuda is still grappling with the effects of what they discovered in that case. This is the story of Julian Washington. So it's January 2012. One night, a group of friends are at a house on the island of Bermuda, and one of them decides to step outside. It's like, I don't know if they were at a birthday party or they were playing video games. I've read a bit of both, but the long and the short is one of them, a man by the name of Stefan Burgess, steps outside. And when he steps outside, he realizes that somebody was there waiting for him. A man steps out of the shadow. The man is dressed in all black. He's wearing black gloves, a black helmet with a visor, and the man has a gun. And the man starts to fire. He shoots at Stefan and he hits him twice. The shooter then stepped into the house and fired again, hitting another man, a man by the name of Devano. The shooter then jumps on a black motorcycle that's waiting for him. It's like a scooter, and rides off into the night. The man inside the house, Devano, was badly injured, but he would survive. Stefan Burgess, the first man who got shot, died. No doubt the question that was on everybody's mind immediately after was, who was the shooter? You can just imagine the problem that the police and the community faced based on my description. The person wore a helmet with a visor. Nobody had seen the shooter's face. So, what did the police do? They started to round up people. They arrested about 5 men. They interrogated them and let them go. And it probably seemed at first like they were out of luck, but then things started to turn in their favor. But then things eventually made a turn in their favor. The gunman had covered his face and covered his hands, but he had left some clues at the scene. When he fired the gun, it ejected spent casings, and the police were able to collect those casings on the scene. They collected 6 bullet casings and they swabbed them for DNA and sent them off to a lab to be tested. When they arrested the different suspects that I mentioned, they also swabbed them for DNA and for gunshot residue and sent that off to the lab to be tested as well. They were hopeful, and rightly so, that science would be able to shed a light on the mystery man's identity. Now eventually, the police got by the DNA results, and it was beautiful. It was perfect. Couldn't ask for better results. Based on the report, they were able to narrow their search down to one man. They went and they rearrested a 24-year-old young man by the name of Julian Washington. The DNA evidence pointed directly to him. And to the police, it made sense because in addition to the DNA evidence, they also had a theory of motive of why he would want to do it. Julian was friend with a man by the name of Anthony, and Anthony and Stefan, the man who died, had a ongoing quarrel or feud. There was an altercation, the court said, between Anthony and Stefan. So if you're thinking tit for tat, that was tit. The day before the shooting, Anthony was riding his bicycle. Stefan knocked him off and caused Anthony to lose a tooth. Tat. The theory was that Anthony told Julian, who was his brethren, and Julian went and did the shootings to settle the score. The police charged Julian Washington for murdering Stefan Burgess and for the attempted murder of Devano Brimmer, among other things. He insisted from the start that he was innocent. 100% not guilty is how he described it at one point, according to the Royal Gazette, the prominent paper in Bermuda. He said he was innocent, he refused to plead guilty, and so of course it had to go to a trial. At the trial, the evidence that tied him to the crime, the evidence that was like an eyewitness, stronger than an eyewitness seeing him commit the crime, was the DNA evidence. The DNA evidence sunk him. It sunk him because of what it said, because of who said it, because of how the person said it. At the time, all of Bermuda's DNA testing was being done by a forensic lab in Florida by the name of Trinity DNA Solutions. It was a forensically accredited DNA lab in the United States run by a forensic scientist by the name of Candy Zuliga. They didn't just do DNA tests and send you the report. Ms. Zuliga, who ran the lab, would also go to court. She would go to court and she would testify as an expert witness about her findings. And she was a witness in Julian Washington's case. The point of her evidence was to say, can you connect the DNA found on the bullet casing to the DNA of any of the suspects? Remember I told you that the police had rounded up a group of youth and the police had taken samples from all of them. She told the jurors that she tested the DNA of 5 people and her test ruled out 4 people as possible contributors. The test ruled out 4 and it left 1 possible contributor, Julian Washington. Okay, he's a possible contributor, but like, to what degree? How likely is it that it's his DNA? How likely was it that it was his DNA on the outside of the bullets that were used to murder Stefan and to wound Devano? She said that there was a 1 in 46 million chance that the DNA came from any other person in the black population of Bermuda. A 1 in 46 million chance that it came from another black person in Bermuda. And a 1 in 173 million chance that it came from any of the white people in Bermuda. Bermuda's population is about 60,000 and the black population is 30-something thousand. Basically, she was saying the DNA found on the bullet casings could only have come from Julian Washington. There was no other possible explanation. You may be saying to yourself, whoa, that's strong. I wonder how Julian challenged that. It's a good question. He didn't challenge it because he didn't have an expert forensic witness to examine the DNA results and testify on his behalf. For many people in the Caribbean in that position, the issue is usually money. I haven't talked to Julian Washington, nor have I spoken to any of the lawyers who represented him at any point. What I'm able to say is from the court documents, he didn't call a forensic expert, and so he wasn't able to challenge Ms. Zuliga's evidence scientifically. So the evidence is there before the jury. DNA is found on the bullets that were used in this shooting. The expert has said there's a 1 in 46 million chance that the DNA could have come from another black person. So a prosecutor said, well, there you have it. As a matter of scientific fact, Julian Washington touched the bullets. And obviously, why would he touch the bullets except that he was loading the gun? And why would he load the gun except that he was going out there to do this shooting? The prosecutor told the jury, Mr. Foreman, Madam Foreman, members of the jury, you can draw the inference. That means you can come to the conclusion. You can put 2 and 2 together. Yes, you didn't see his face, but everything points in his direction inescapably. There are 2 things that show how impactful the DNA evidence was, how much it impressed everybody who heard it. First is the verdict. The jury found Julian Washington guilty of all charges, but there seems to me to be a story in how their verdict came in, right? Because it wasn't unanimous for all the charges. Unanimous mean all the jurors say guilty or not guilty. So Bermuda allows non-unanimous jury verdicts, which means that you can have 9 people say guilty and that will be accepted instead of all 12. Julian Washington was charged for 4 crimes: murder, attempted murder, firing a gun, and handling ammunition. Only 9 out of the 12, only 9 jurors found him guilty of murder, attempted murder, and firing the gun. All 12 found him guilty of handling ammunition. What does that mean to you? Tell me if what it means to me is the same thing that it means to you. That there were some jurors who said, I am not convinced that he went and he did the shooting. The evidence doesn't lead me to that conclusion, but I have to accept that he did touch the bullets. They were saying that we don't know, we are not convinced that he did this crime, but we can't escape the fact that 1 in 46 million means that he had to have done it. The second thing that shows how powerful the DNA evidence was is that after Julian was convicted, he appealed to the Court of Appeal. And at the Court of Appeal, his lawyer came at the conviction from many different angles. But one of the things the lawyer attacked was the DNA evidence. He pointed to problems in Ms. Zuliga's approach and interpretation. And what do you think happened? The Court of Appeal basically said to the lawyer that this attack on the DNA evidence is your weakest ground of appeal. To the court, the DNA evidence was rock solid, unimpeachable. They said, we consider this ground of appeal to be unsustainable. Indeed, we did not require the Crown to respond to it. They basically said to the Crown, to the prosecutor, sit down. You don't have to answer this, just sit down. That's how clear, that's how strong, how solid the science was. The story was this man had covered his face, but he hadn't covered his tracks. It was the perfect example of what we in the Caribbean have said we want to see from law enforcement and investigative agencies. Rely on science. Don't just pick up people off the road and come up with some story. Rely on science, and it seemed like this was a success story. Really. Julian Washington was convicted for the murder of Stefan Burgess, was convicted for the attempted murder of Devana Brimmer. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 30 years. And he began to serve his sentence. He lost his appeal, justice had triumphed, and it went on like that for years and years and years, at least so far as the public was aware. Like so many people in the Caribbean and across the world who didn't get the protection of law that they were promised by their governments and which they had expected. Julian Washington's case changed for the better only after a group by the name of the Death Penalty Project stepped in. The Death Penalty, I have no affiliation with the Death Penalty Project. I have admiration for the Death Penalty Project, but no affiliation with them. The Death Penalty Project is a charity in the UK. They are focused on abolishing the death penalty across the world, and you may not know, but they have been involved in the Caribbean for decades. And we have to talk about the death penalty, but it's something for another time. What I want to highlight right now is that they don't just work on death penalty cases. In episode 2 and 3 of Stuck, I told the story of Lessine Edwards. It was the Death Penalty Project that helped Lessine Edwards secure leading experts to prove that it was impossible for him to have murdered the mother of his children. When you hear my interview with Krista Mason-Smith in the Bahamas, you will hear her say that it was owing to the Death Penalty Project that Vincent Aristi was able to bring his case to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council. Without their help, he would likely still be in prison and still have the stain of a wrongful conviction on his life. There's a lot of things that we need to talk about in terms of access to justice in the Caribbean. But I must say, on record, even though it's just in passing, that doing this series has really caused me to develop a tremendous appreciation and respect for the Death Penalty Project. Anyway, In Julian's case, they got an American professor by the name of Dr. Dan Krane to review the DNA evidence that sent him to prison. I interviewed Dr. Krane and we talk at length about his experience in Julian's case. So I won't play the full interview here, but suffice it to say, he found some problems in Julian Washington's case.
This might take a while. The Julian Washington case was a very interesting one in just the number of the problems. Quite often when I get involved with a case, there's one or two or maybe three very focused specific issues. But in Julian Washington's case, it was like pretty much at every turn, I was finding something that was conspicuously wrong in terms of the way that things had been done.
Dr. Krane reviewed the DNA evidence against Julian Washington and he highlighted 8 problems.
One of the things that was really quite remarkable about the Julian Washington case, though, was what I described in my statements and as what I think it's simply understood as a suspect-centric interpretation. And what that means in somewhat simpler language is that the test results from the evidence sample in the case were interpreted by people who used Julian Washington's own reference DNA profile to determine what it is they were seeing in the evidence. It's like the opposite of blind testing. What you want for a good objective test, for it to be scientific and objective, is you want the object to speak for itself. You want to be, and the voice of the object to be the same, regardless of who the suspect is that's being evaluated. And yet what was happening in Julian Washington's case is that on the one hand, they were holding up the test results and they're saying, gee, I'm not quite sure if there's DNA that says this or it says that. Oh, here, let's look to see what Julian Washington's DNA profile is. That will help us to determine if what we're seeing in the evidence is a signal or if it's an artifact or some other kind of noise. From a statistician's perspective, statisticians have all sorts of cool analogies. They would say that what was being done is the laboratory was painting a target around the arrow, right? And it's good imagery, right? You shoot an arrow at the side of a barn and then you come and you paint the bullseye around it and say, look at that, it's a perfect hit. Whereas we shouldn't be that impressed given the way that the target got applied to the barn.
Julian Washington appealed to Bermuda's highest court, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, which is the final court of appeal for some other Caribbean countries, including Jamaica. He asked the Privy Council to consider fresh evidence based on a report that the expert prepared. The long and the short of it is that when the matter was brought forward, the prosecution agreed to his immediate release. When I say immediate, they agreed for him to leave prison before the Privy Council even heard the matter. In fact, the discussion turned to whether or not the Privy Council needed to have a hearing at all. I'm thankful, tremendously grateful, that Julian's team pressed for a hearing, because we have that official public record of the hearing and we have the written decision of the court, which gives us the background of what happened and also explained the problems that arose in Julian's case so that all of us can learn from it. Alright. You know what the craziest thing is for me about this story of Julian Washington? Julian Washington spent 10 years in prison, and then overnight the authorities chased him out, couldn't get him out fast enough. It was so clear that it was a wrongful conviction at that point. But when I spoke to Dr. Dan Krane, he told me that it didn't take him more than about 10 minutes of analyzing the DNA evidence to realize that it was flawed. 10 years in prison, 10 minutes. That tells me that there is information out there to help people. There are resources out there that can make a phenomenal difference in somebody's life, that can save somebody 20, 50 years of their life. But somebody has to get involved. Somebody has to come off the sidelines. Somebody who has the social capital, who has the interest, who has the professional connections, has to come off the sidelines and make the connection. One thing you can do today is begin to understand the system. What do I mean by that? Many of us think of wrongful convictions or anything bad that happens in the justice system as a police problem. Or some people will say, boy, it's a resource problem, or it's a technology problem. Julian Washington's case wasn't a case of police corruption. The government had an expert, an expensive expert, even if the quality of the expert's work wasn't good. Definitely there was an imbalance. And so this was an access to justice issue. This case, like the case of Lessine Edwards, highlights the problem of people in the Caribbean who don't have access to expert evidence, and how not having independent experts can lead to wrongful convictions. Experts play a major role in the criminal justice system, and if we want to prevent and correct wrongful convictions, we have to think about how to increase the availability of experts to Caribbean citizens. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'm Andrew Wiles and this is Stuck. If you haven't yet subscribed, please go ahead and do so. If you like this episode, please let me know your thoughts in the comments and share it. Hey, thanks for listening. Stuck is written and presented by me, Andrew Wiles. It is brought to you by The Wave on the Frequency Network. Subscribe to Stuck wherever you get your podcasts. You can read more about the project at andrewwiles.com. And if you found the conversation interesting or helpful, share it. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.